Alright, so in this training video, we're going to talk about how to dopamine max your life to success. This is where a lot of people completely misunderstand this. So especially if you're working hard but feel inconsistent, then hopefully you'll get some value out of this. So it sounds a bit extreme, dopamine maxing your life, but stay with me here because we're actually talking about not chasing dopamine, but actually using dopamine to your advantage. How can we link it with meaningful work? So hard work becomes fun. It's learning how to control your dopamine system so your performance becomes stable instead of unpredictable. So we're going to break this down properly. So let's look at why most people get dopamine completely wrong, why dopamine stops working at a certain level, and what dopamine is actually doing in your system, and how to structure your day so you can operate at a consistently high level without forcing it or feeling burnt out or using loads of willpower. Okay, so before we get into it, if you want to fully understand the frameworks and discussions here, you can join the free community in the description. If you want to work with me directly, you can book a call as well. And if you want weekly ideas around health, wealth, relationships, and self-improvement, then there's the free community as well. So when most people think of dopamine, they think of two extremes, usually either something to avoid, it's a bad thing, or something they really crave and want to maximize. Both of these kind of miss the point because dopamine is not just about feeling good. It's not something you can just hack by increasing it. It's actually more about regulation and how your brain assigns value to effort. It decides what feels worth doing, and that means your ability to sit down and work, to stay focused, to follow through. It's not just about discipline, but rather it's about how your system is calibrated. So this is where people default back to discipline. They think if I had just more control, I would be more consistent. And on the surface, that sounds right, because discipline is what allows you to act without relying on how you feel. And you do need it, but here's where it starts to break. Discipline is not a source of energy, it's finite. You can't just keep working hard and have unlimited willpower. At a certain point, you actually have to enjoy what you're doing, or you're going to just burn out, or you're going to just give up. And that's where the dopamine system comes into play. So, if the underlying system is unstable, discipline becomes unreliable. You can force yourself for a few days, but eventually resistance will happen, and your system eventually pushes back. So, most people think they lack discipline, but they're actually experiencing instability. This is where the idea of dopamine maxing starts to make more sense, but not in the way most people think. It's not about increasing dopamine as much as possible. It's about optimizing your baseline so that effort feels consistently accessible. Because your brain is always making comparisons. It's not asking, is this task important? It's asking, is the task more rewarding than the alternative available right now? And those alternatives are shaped by your recent inputs. So if your system has been exposed to constant stimulation, fast content, quick rewards, your baseline shifts upwards. And when that happens, normally work starts to feel flat. Not because the work is bad, but because it cannot compete with what your brain has been conditioned to expect. Your brain is used to this quick dopamine hits of novelty, constantly switching tasks, and one single deep work isn't going to create those same spikes. And that's going to kind of cause it to feel boring. So you might think you're lazy because of this, but that's kind of a bit harsh. In reality, the relative value of your work has dropped. So instead of trying to push harder, you start thinking in terms of calibration. How do I bring my system into a state where work naturally feels engaging, fun, stimulating enough so I can sustain this? And that comes down to two main variables: stimulation and fragmentation. Stimulation is about intensity of your work. Fragmentation is about how often you switch and how your attention is divided. Both of these directly affect your dopamine system. If you constantly jump between tasks, between inputs, between sources of attention, your brain never stabilizes. And when your brain never stabilizes, your baseline never settles. So even when you sit down to work, part of your attention is still somewhere else. That feels like resistance, but it's actually leftover attention. There's a concept from psychology called attention residue. It explains that when you switch from one task to another, part of your attention remains on the previous task. So you're not fully able to give your full focus on the current task. So you're never fully present. And if you stack enough of these switches, your thinking becomes shallow. Not because you lack depth, but because you're not staying anywhere long enough to reach that sort of depth. So now you have two things happening at once. Your dopamine baseline is unstable because of overstimulation, and your attention is fragmented because of constant switching tasks. And you're trying to solve both of these with discipline, harder work, more willpower. This is why it feels like pushing against something invisible. So what does it actually mean to dopamine max your life properly? It means you stop chasing these spikes and instead you start protecting your baseline. Because once you stabilize your baseline, everything changes. Work feels lighter, focus lasts longer, it actually feels enjoyable, and discipline stops feeling like something you have to constantly apply in your life. Instead, you actually just allow your natural dopamine system to drive you towards the things that give you value and are moving your life forward. So the first place to start is to monitor your inputs, not trying to eliminate everything and be really extreme, but just to be aware of what is actually going into your brain and becoming more intentional about that. Because your system adapts to what you repeatedly expose yourself to. If your inputs are chaotic, your output will also be chaotic. If your inputs are controlled, your output becomes predictable. The second place to focus on is the beginning of your day, because the first inputs you consume set the tone for everything that follows. If your day starts with reaction, then you're going to be in a reactive, stressed state for the rest of the day. It's going to be really hard for you to actually get into a productive, proactive, deep zone. And on the other hand, if you start your day being focused, protecting your time, your energy, then you're going to get yourself into a really proactive, creative state, and that's going to carry forward for the rest of the day. So, delaying high stimulation inputs, even for a short window, creates a completely different trajectory for the rest of the day. The third is reducing your switching. So pick one thing and stay with it long enough to move past the initial friction. You will start to actually lock in, feel a bit more present, feel more focused, and actually start to enjoy it. And that's a good sign. Because depth only happens after that point. If you keep resetting, you never fully reach it. You're constantly looking for the new set of dopamine hit novelty, and you're never really achieving anything worthwhile. So as we wrap this up, I want you to reframe how you look at inconsistency. It's not a discipline or a willpower problem, it's a calibration problem. Your brain is responding exactly the way it is being trained. And once you change your inputs, the sequence, the level of fragmentation, your output changes with it as well. And that's kind of what I mean when we talk about dopamine maxing. And that's what dopamine maxing actually is. Not chasing highs, but building a system where your baseline supports the level you want to operate at. It starts feeling normal after time, which is pretty cool. Alright, so if this made sense, if you got some value from this, then subscribe and I'll see you on the next video.